Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. For several years, a sexual predator stalked Calgarians, leaving the entire city on edge.
We kind of dubbed him the Southwest Rapist, a very elusive person at the time.
I appeal to you and to your loved ones to come forward immediately. I urge you to give yourself up, turn yourself in, and end the fears that you have created.
It was the late 1970s, early 80s, a time before cell phones, surveillance video, and DNA, making it a challenge for investigators. And the clock was ticking to find the offender.
Can't tell you the amount of pressure it put on me and my superiors.
Their worst fears were confirmed just 24 hours later.
And I just had this overwhelming feeling that I was never going to see her alive again.
Here now is Nancy Hixt with The Hunt for a Predator.
In the spring of 1980, Calgary teachers walked off the job in one of the longest strikes in the city's history. On one particularly nice day in June, two young girls took advantage of the unexpected early summer break. They went for a bike ride to the Glenmore Reservoir. The girls were normally in grade 4 and 5 classes, but on this day they soaked in the sunshine and stopped to throw rocks in the water. On their way home, they decided to cut off the main bike path and took a dirt trail up the hill. That's when, out of nowhere, a man appeared and forced the two girls into some bushes where he violently sexually assaulted them.
I got a pager message to go to an address in Southwest Calgary where two young girls reported being attacked. Oh yeah, it happened here.
Jack Mullins was a detective with the Calgary Police Sex Crimes Unit.
We had the interviews at the house. I got some statements. I asked them if they would write out on paper what they saw, what he looked like, this guy, and how they came upon him.
Detective Mullins has a clear memory of the interview with the two little girls.
They're children. They're just kids. They were on their bikes. They were down by the park, and they got intercepted by this fellow. He had assaulted them. One little girl he tied up with a tea towel, wrapped a tea towel around.
He said the girls provided remarkably clear descriptions of their attacker.
They were very brave and very astute. And I remember the one little girl saying to me, you know, I peeked. I lifted the blindfold and I peeked. Am I going to be in trouble? I said, no, you're not in trouble, no. And I remember that. Little girls, so brave, those little girls, you know, what they did that day. It was a very, very moving interview with those two little girls.
Detective Mullins was convinced these girls would help police find the offender.
I left these little girls with my business card and I said, we're getting really close to finding this guy. You might see him around. And I do remember telling them that if you could keep your eyes peeled and if you see him, phone me and here's my card.
The attack was one of many being investigated by the Calgary Police Service in the late 70s and early 80s.
The city was kind of going nuts. The big thing about what was happening was a lot of midnight break-ins and sex assaults, and then there were, similarly going on at the same time, there were events involving children, youngsters. Youngsters were being attacked on the street, and a very elusive person at the time.
Both women and children were flashed.
A lot of people would think you've probably heard it. You know, a guy who's a flasher, oh, that's all they do. And many are, as far as they go. But there's many, not many, there's a fair number that will go up the ladder. And he was one of them, a nasty, nasty one.
Others were sexually assaulted.
She was the cleaner in that school, and she was in there alone. He went to the other side of the school and broke out the glass, and then walked through the school and attacked her. And actually, we don't use the word rape very often, but that's what it was. It was an out-and-out assault.
Investigators believed they were looking for a serial rapist.
We kind of dubbed him the Southwest Rapist, yeah. You had to know by the MO and after the interviews with the victims, you had to know there's a link there.
Police knew the violence was escalating with a brazen daylight attack, and he threatened to kill his victims if they didn't cooperate. What no one knew at the time is that the worst had already happened.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. As sex crimes detectives search for a serial rapist, months earlier, a little girl was kidnapped and murdered, and the killer continued to elude police. What no one realized at the time, the cases were connected. Here again is Nancy Hixt with The Hunt for a Predator.
Kimberly Thompson, affectionately called Kimmy, grew up in the inner-city Calgary neighborhood of Altadore.
She was a happy little girl. She loved her jewelry. You know, she loved being around people. Yeah, she was just happy. She was a beautiful little girl, big brown eyes.
The 5-year-old was the youngest of 3 children.
She just loved her picture being taken. And anytime I tried, she would crawl towards me. So you can't get the pictures, right? She loved hanging out with her brother and sister and her cousins.
Her mother said this photo was a big deal to Kimmy. It was her school portrait, which marked the beginning of kindergarten. She was loving school, and everything seemed to be going well.
Until I had a conference with the teacher, and she told me that Kim was too dependent on me, that I should let her do things on her own. So that was the first time I let her go to school on her own. I had my reservations, and I thought, no, you know, that's not a good idea. But then I thought, what do I do? So I figured, okay, I'll try it.
Evelyn Thompson remembers those final moments before Kimmy walked to school alone for the first time on January 24th, 1980.
So when she was going, she had left all her mittens at school. So I said to her, you know, make sure you bring your mittens home from school. And she, you know, I said, and go straight to school, you know. And I watched her till she got to the corner. And then I went back in, and I was babysitting at the time, my niece and nephew.
It was only a 6-block walk to Altadore Elementary School.
And then at lunchtime, the other kids came home, and my niece, she said to me, Auntie, where's Kimmy? And I looked at the clock, and it was like 12:15 or something. So I ran to the school, and I went in and I checked kindergarten room, and she's not there. I went to the office and I said, you know, where's Kim Thompson? Oh, she didn't make it here today. I thought, oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. So on the way home, I ran and I stopped at all her little friends' place that I knew where she might go, and nobody had seen her. So when I got home, I was so rattled that I couldn't even remember the phone number to the police station. So I had to call my sister, and I said, you know, what is the number? Well, why? I said, because Kimmy's missing. She didn't make it to school today.
Friends and family retraced Kimmy's steps, but there was no sign of her.
I was just terrified. And then the police came and, you know, set up a command center outside, and they started searching. Friends of ours from the military came over, they were searching. Friends walked around the neighborhood searching, and it got later and later and later. And I was standing at the window about, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night. And it was snowing. Oh, it was snowing, big snowflakes. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that I was never going to see her alive again.
A parent's worst fear. And as the hours passed, hope of finding Kimmy alive faded.
Her disappearance triggered a round-the-clock search by 60 police officers, the military, and more than 100 concerned citizens.
They told me not to leave the house, so I stayed, and there were people around. My dad was there, my partner was there, and I think it was around, and I don't know the exact timing, but I think it was around noon in there, when a police officer came in, and he said, we found her body. And I'm not even sure if I collapsed or not, but I could feel my knees going out, and my dad had one side of me and Dawn was on the other. And I don't really remember much after that.
Their worst fears were confirmed just 24 hours later when the little girl's nude, frozen body was discovered in a garbage bin only blocks from her Altadore home.
The girl's body was wrapped in a garbage bag, piled in a fence-lined garbage container just 4 blocks from her home. On the ground, detectives began piecing together the grisly facts.
I got the phone call, said, you got to come to work. We've got a homicide of a child here. So that's how it all started for me in the afternoon of January 25th, 1980.
Detective Daryl Wilson became the primary investigator assigned to the case.
The first step is to sit down with the family members and discuss the situation with them. You know, what was a normal day, who was around her, what were her normal activities, who lived in the home with them, all of those sorts of things, and those sorts of people that were involved with her had to be ruled out.
The police were really good. I went downtown and to the police station, and they interviewed me, and I was in that room for a long time, you know, because they needed to get their information, but it was never like, they didn't blame me.
Kimmy's family was cleared, except in the court of public opinion.
They blamed me. They thought that I had killed her. And then it wasn't me, it was Dawn, or her biological dad. My kids were bullied at school.
Fear in Calgary grew. The public wanted answers, and they wanted someone held responsible.
I don't recall an incident where a child had ever had an issue getting from home to school until this one occurred. Because it was so unusual, it became big news and was on the news constantly for a long time after that. People stopped letting their kids walk to school on their own. Everybody was scared that whoever had done this to Kimberly Thompson was still out there. And as a result, they were driving their children to school or walking with them, and that went on for months.
In my capacity as mayor and as a resident of the Altadore area in which the tragedy took place, I am appealing to you to come forward to the police.
Investigators worked around the clock.
The first step after we had eliminated everybody close to her was to start door-to-door inquiries in the neighborhood. It was a long process. We got as many detectives and constables as we could to help with it, and started doing door-to-door and just worked our way out from where she lived, and knocked on every door the best we could. Nobody said anything. Nobody saw anything. It's amazing.
Kimmy Thompson's murder became a true whodunit.
Can't tell you the amount of pressure it put on me and my superiors. Every day they were wanting updates and wanting news, what's going on with this case. And so my superiors were then coming to my partner and I, and what's going on, and have you done this, have you done that? And as we know, investigating a homicide is a slow process. There's no shortcuts. It still brings back memories.
Homicide detective Daryl Wilson spent many days in the inner city neighborhood of Altadore in 1980 while investigating the murder of 5-year-old Kimmy Thompson.
This corner here was the home that Kimmy lived in, and it's not there any longer, but and it had a side door which she would leave in the morning and walk straight down 19th Street. So they had a visual on her for about a block down the street here.
Back then, there were no CCTV or doorbell cameras to help catch the killer.
Would have been resolved within a day or two, I'm sure. They'd be watching her till she got to the corner here, and then she would cross the street.
Investigators walked the route Kimmy would have taken, looking for any clues that could lead them to a suspect.
There was no footprints. In fact, if I remember correctly, there had been a fresh snow. The culprit in this case had backtracked after he got home and made sure there wasn't any.
Then there was the scene where Kimmy's body was found.
This is probably what's left of it. Kimberly was found by some volunteers that were out searching. They came across the garbage bag, which was in this indented garbage area here. There was a fence that ran all along here, and thought that the bag looked a little unusual in shape. So they tore a small hole in it and saw what they thought was remains, and immediately left it as it was and went off to find police.
An autopsy was completed at the medical examiner's office at the Foothills Hospital. But collection and testing of forensic evidence was very different in the 1980s.
Back in those days, as a homicide detective, you did a lot of your own forensic gathering, whereas that wouldn't happen nowadays. So it was necessary for us to very slowly collect evidence from Kimberly's body. There was many, I can say there was certainly many hairs and fibers that were located on the body and removed by us.
The samples were sent to the RCMP crime lab in Edmonton, but results would take time.
It was frustrating. There was another issue as well, and it was made public. Not that we particularly wanted it made public, and that was the clothing was never found. And so after it was announced that we were still looking for clothing, it had never been found with the victim. It kept coming up on the news. We still don't know what happened to the clothing in this case.
Then, 5 days after Kimberly Thompson's body was found, there was an anonymous phone call to a nearby business.
It was called All West. It was a grocery store back in those days, and told them that if they went to the dumpster, they were going to find clothing. And so, of course, they did. And one of the people that worked in the grocery store happened to be the son of a police officer. So he phoned his dad right away and said, "Hey, this has happened, and what do we do here?" So His father told him how to collect the evidence and to just leave it as best he could, not handle it.
Investigators carefully examined the items found in the garbage bag.
And we're talking a snowsuit and boots and all the other garments normally. I think there was mitts and scarf. And the clothing matched what we knew about Kimberly's body. That again, we're back to these hairs and fibers. And in fact, it was our staff sergeant at the time that went and retrieved the bag and laid it out, examined it, removed what he could from it, and the rest of it was packed up, and it was actually sent or taken to another crime lab in Toronto by one of our detectives. They were hoping for fingerprints. They had a new system for fingerprints, removing fingerprints back in those days.
Unfortunately, no fingerprints were recovered. But while that forensic testing was happening, police received lab results from the original samples taken during the autopsy. And while testing was a lot more primitive, it did prove to be helpful.
There was no DNA, of course. Human hair was certainly helpful if you had a collection from the right person, but we didn't have that, of course, at that time. But they definitely could tell us it was dog, and they definitely could tell us that there was many carpet fibers, as well, along with towels or blankets, fibers from things like that as well that we found.
Detective Wilson and his partner came up with a cutting-edge strategy. They would track down Kimmy's killer by finding their dog.
We knew that she lived in the area that the body was found, so we felt that probably we're looking for a suspect that lives in that area as well. So my partner and I decided that we're going to start our own campaign and get some help from time to time and just concentrate on homes with dogs. So we set out on that, and day after day after day doing this, knocking on doors and we would ask them about the case. We would tell them why we're there, but we didn't bother to tell them that we were taking hair from their dogs. Something more the color of like a German Shepherd, where each hair follicle is maybe got some different colors in it. It's not a solid color and not white for sure, so we could rule out any white dogs right away.
It was a slow and tedious process, as samples took months to collect.
We had small round canisters that we would then put that in and mark it when we got outside to make sure we knew where it came from.
Each one had to be sent away for testing, but they hoped this would lead them to a suspect. As the investigation continued, Kimberly Thompson was laid to rest in a cemetery east of Calgary. But her family struggled to grieve, knowing her killer was still on the loose. Then, nearly 5 months later, 2 little girls riding their bikes were attacked and sexually assaulted.
Yeah, there was the Southwest Rapist. Everybody had heard about him, but it was about the older women. It was on the news when things happened. Yeah, but I never thought it would be a young child.
Police had been on the hunt for a serial rapist, but didn't realize a connection between the 2 cases. Then, a very brave little girl called police with a tip that changed the direction of the entire investigation. When 2 young girls were grabbed and assaulted while out riding their bikes, their attacker used a knife to scare them. He threatened to kill them. Then, 6 days after their attack, not far from where it all happened, one of the little girls was out with her mother.
She spotted him down in the Mission District, Elbow Drive area, and she said, "I gotta get over and phone Detective Mullins. I got his card." So her mother drove over to the Holy Cross Hospital, which is not far away. Out come the commissionaire, and he's doing his job. You're not parking here. Nobody parks here. You can't. I got to phone Detective Mullins. It was kind of a funny scenario, but boy, she was determined. And you know, you couldn't have got a better identification. I mean, there he is right there in life, the same guy that had attacked her earlier. We hustled a couple of blue and white police cars over there and got him right away.
Harold Smeltzer was taken into custody.
And we put him straight into an interview room. And we'd offered him you can have a lawyer and all that sort of stuff. He turned it down.
24-year-old Smeltzer lived with his parents in Altadore. He had 6 prior convictions relating to property crime and theft.
Started very slowly, and I couldn't tell you how many hours it was, but there was people outside, police officers outside, wondering who this guy was. But we kept it ourselves because we'd created a connection with him.
Before long, he confessed to the violent attack on the 2 little girls.
And I said, would you take us to where that happened? And I said, because that'd be very helpful and things like that. And he said, yes. So my partner went out the door so before he changed his mind. And we got forensics, follow us with the cameras. So we got out of the car, and I was talking to him. And I said, now show us where it was. And he pointed out the place. So we got out of the car, and I said, can you tell us where it's doing? And all the time they're taking cameras, right, for evidence. So we got that one, well, nailed down. How many others have you done this type of thing, that type of conversation? And he started telling you there was many and many. But we did drive him around to identify a whole bunch more. And when you see those on the charge list, those are the ones that he showed us. And then he started rattling them off. He knew where they were. He pointed them out, and then we'd check it with the files. He was right.
Harold Smeltzer admitted to being the Southwest Calgary Rapist.
We were chatting with him. I mean, he was fairly easy to chat to be honest. He was just not nonchalant. If that's the right word, it might not be quite the right word, but he was not in a big panic. He didn't shout at us.
Given the detailed confessions and the age range Smeltzer admitted to victimizing, sex crimes detectives turned the case over to the homicide unit and Detective Daryl Wilson, who had been investigating the murder of 5-year-old Kimmy Thompson for the past 5 months.
So I was in the homicide office, and we were spoken to by Detective Coleman and his partner, and they told us briefly what they had, what the case was about, and so my partner and I went to the people in the door where the suspect was sitting, and we both looked at each other and said, we got our guy here, we're pretty sure. And so that was the first time I had ever heard of him.
Detective Wilson said Smeltzer's hair color matched the human hair samples they had collected. And he lived just a couple blocks from Kimmy's home.
He was fairly relaxed until it was my partner that finally said to him, Harold, we need to talk about Kimberly. And at that time he started to get some tears. And so again, it reassured us that we probably had the right guy. He got very quiet, didn't say much for a while. So we just let him think about it a little bit.
Just moments later,
he fully confessed. And this is another interesting thing about him. When he talked to you about crimes that he had committed, he was very meticulous and didn't want to miss any points. If you tried to say, well, what about this? He'd say, I'll get to that, but I want to make sure I tell you this first. He was, for a person that was, like I say, not well educated, when it come to crimes, he seemed to be meticulous about it.
Harold Smeltzer provided chilling insight into Kimmy Thompson's murder.
What he said is that he had set out to go to the grocery store. There was a corner store not too far it was in Altadore, not too far from where they lived. And he really enjoyed pop, beverages. And so he decided he wanted to go get some pop in the morning. And when he set out, he realized, I don't have any money and I don't have any bottle returns, so I can't get the pop. But about the same time, he sees Kimberly Thompson, and she's dawdling along playing in the snow. And so he just watched her for a while and decided that what his words were is, I'd like to have sex with her. So he followed her for a while until she got to a spot where he felt that it would be easy enough to just pick her up and carry her up the back alley to his own house. And so that's what he did. So he took her in the house and asked her to undress. Told her again that he was going to have sex with her. He said he didn't think she understood that. This was in the living room. He took her into his parents' bedroom and laid her on the bed, and all of a sudden he just said he just couldn't go through with it. But we still don't know why, what actually stopped him. He decided that he couldn't do it. They went back out to the living room, and now he's in a panic because she knows where he lives and may have seen him playing soccer with the neighborhood kids.
Detectives took Harold Smeltzer back to Altadore, where he walked them through that fateful January day. He told them he drowned Kimmy in a bathtub.
When Harold is in a panic and decides he has to get rid of the body, he finally decides, I'm going to take the garbage bag, put it into my little red wagon that he'd had for years, covered it up with a blanket, and keep in mind this is January, there's quite a bit of snow, and he pulls it out from the side of the home, out the front street, and then eventually makes his way down 18th Street to the corner of 42nd Avenue. When he reaches the corner of 42nd Avenue, he makes a right turn and goes to 19th Street, and then heads south on 19th Street from there, until he eventually gets it to the place where she was found. So it was actually, we felt good and relieved that we had caught the culprit for such an awful crime, but it's also hard to control yourself because you don't really want to be nice to this guy, and you're trying to be nice to get the information from him. So it's tough for sure, yeah.
Smeltzer also had a dog.
We had the right dog hair in our office. We had collected dog hair, and it just hadn't been sent to the lab yet. So eventually, I think the lab was able to tell us that out of all the dog hair samples we collected, there was 4 that we needed to take a look at, and the Smeltzer dog was one of them. So we would have eventually been led there, for sure.
After years of holding an entire city in fear, police believed they had caught the Southwest Calgary rapist, ending his reign of terror. They also believed he killed 5-year-old Kimmy Thompson. The offender had already confessed, but would there be justice for all of the victims? Here now is Nancy Hixt with a conclusion of the hunt for a predator.
It was 5 months before police arrested a suspect, Altadore resident Harold Smeltzer. He also faces several rape charges.
In addition to a long list of sex crimes charges related to the Southwest Calgary Rapist cases, Harold Smeltzer was also charged with the first-degree murder of Kimberly Thompson.
He stayed fairly close to home. All of the sex crimes that he committed, to the best of my knowledge, were in the southwest area of the city to start with. and a lot of them within walking distance, because he did walk a lot. He either walked or rode a bicycle.
Kimmy's family found it hard to believe they lived alongside a predator and a killer.
My son came to me in tears and he said, "Mommy, don't be mad at me." And I looked at him and I said, "Why would I be mad at you?" He says, "Because we played football with him." So I said, "Well, I said, I'm not mad at you. You didn't know." But yeah, when he came to me, just crying. It's like, what do you do? And that's what he did. He hung around the kids in the neighborhood.
In the spring of 1981, Harold Smeltzer stood trial for the first-degree murder of 5-year-old Kimberly Thompson. Smeltzer pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His defense argued he wasn't able to think of the consequences of his actions.
I would describe him as a loner. I would describe him as poorly educated. Didn't want to write anything himself because he didn't know how to spell words. So both the sex crimes detectives and my partner and I did all the writing for him when he did give statements. We did all the writing for him. He was unemployed. I don't think he'd ever worked that much in his life. His parents sort of looked after him.
Detective Wilson said through his confessions and recounting each crime at each scene, it was clear he knew what he was doing. And a jury agreed. It took them only an hour to convict Harold Smeltzer of first-degree murder. Following the verdict, Smeltzer pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape of the 2 little girls he grabbed off their bikes, 2 counts of attempted rape, acts of gross indecency, break, enter, and commit attempted rape, and possession of a weapon or imitation weapon. Later that year, a reward of approximately $35,000 was given to the little girl who identified Smeltzer, days after her and her friend were sexually assaulted by him.
I really feel sorry for those girls. And the one girl who recognized him and told her mom, and they turned him in. Years later, she contacted my daughter, I think it was, and said how bad she felt that she got the money for the reward. And I said, "Oh God, don't." And I guess she said she just blew it. She didn't. It's like, you deserve it. Don't. You deserve it.
Smeltzer was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years for the first-degree murder of Kimberly Thompson. He received added time for the sexual assault cases to be served concurrently.
The other thing I felt about Harold is that I didn't think that he was the sort of person you could rehabilitate. He'd done these sex crimes over and over and over again. Eventually committed a murder as well, but he just never impressed me as a person that could be rehabilitated.
Evelyn Thompson took solace in knowing Smeltzer would spend the rest of his life in jail.
I was hoping he would never get out. I prayed that he'd never get out.
Not a day goes by that Evelyn doesn't think of her youngest daughter.
I just wonder what she would be like today.
By now, Kimmy would have been nearly 50 years old, and Evelyn can't help but think of all the milestones they've missed celebrating.
Her graduation from kindergarten, graduation from elementary, junior high, high school. Would she have gone on to college? Would she have gotten married? How many kids would she have had?
Losing Kimmy changed everything for her.
It was awful. It is awful. And you never get over it. I mean, you learn to live around it, but you never get over it.
It was hard to let her other 2 kids be kids.
They kind of lived in a prison for years, till they were almost into their teens. They couldn't be alone. I just had this overwhelming fear. When my grandkids are out of my sight, it's like...
She wishes the horrific memories and fear could be in the past. Harold Smeltzer was sentenced to life in prison, and you would think the worst is behind her and she would never have to see or think of him ever again. Instead, the terror all came flooding back in 2008. 28 years after he kidnapped and murdered Kimmy, Smeltzer asked for parole, and he got it.
I found out that he gets out on day parole. He gets a second chance at life, or my baby doesn't.
She's dead, and he gets to go walk, unsupervised.
To do it again, and there'll be another family that has to go through years and years.
He said in his parole hearing that when he goes past a school, he has to put his head down and not look. And where in this country can you go that there isn't some kids? There's a kid on almost every street corner.
Over the years, his freedoms have been increased.
The mom of a young Calgary girl abducted and killed more than 25 years ago is speaking out tonight. She's furious the man who killed her daughter has been granted a weekend pass. Nancy Hixt has been covering this story, and Nancy, Harold Smeltzer is now out on his first overnight pass.
Harold Smeltzer is allowed to leave his halfway house in Regina tonight and stay in an approved home for the entire weekend, beginning tonight until Sunday evening. Smeltzer has been convicted of first-degree murder. Tonight, Kimmy Thompson's family is beside themselves, concerned with the expanded freedoms.
It makes me sick, actually, sick to my stomach, because I'm so afraid that it's going to happen again to somebody else. And nobody should have to go through what our family's gone through.
Then, in 2017, 37 years after killing Kimmy Thompson, parole board documents revealed Smeltzer continued to struggle with sexual deviancy. You admitted to an incident in which, while in the community, you became attracted to an underage girl who was walking down the street towards you. You were able to identify that this may have been triggered by a sex scene you had watched on television before signing out of the correctional center. Still, his freedoms increased, leaving his victims, their families, and those who caught him in the first place fearful.
And that's why I'm here today. I want people to remember Kimberly Thompson. And I also want people to remember this offender. And don't forget about him, because like I say, I do feel unless he gets too old, he's going to reoffend.
In my opinion, life should mean life, and especially when you kill a child who's innocent and they can't protect themselves.
Harold Smeltzer will remain on parole for the rest of his life. His freedoms continue to be expanded and is being transitioned from a halfway house in Saskatchewan to independent living in his own place. In March 2023, the parole board indicated Smeltzer is considered a low to moderate risk to reoffend and concluded the risk was manageable in the community. Over the years, Kimberly's family has been unsuccessful in pushing for Kimmy's law to be passed that would see offenders like Smeltzer sentenced to life in prison to never be eligible for parole. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us. tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.